Greetings, and welcome to a very special moment for me and for the LightCast series. In the spring of 2020, as the world was first being shaken by the virus, I was first introduced to the human design system, a revelatory synthesis of astrology, the ancient I Ching, the Hindu Brahman chakra system, and modern science that offers us a glimpse into the specific energy of the incarnation that we find ourselves in. Upon discovering the system, I immediately and enthusiastically set out to find a coach who could help me decipher the information I was receiving and understand it better. And while there are many out there in the world, I somehow felt intuitively resonant with today's guest, Barbara Ditlow. Barbara is a certified human design analyst, and interestingly, she studied with the man Ra Uru Hu himself. She's a coach and teacher, and in addition to human design, she has studied energy and esoteric healing with practitioners from around the world. Her expertise includes feng shui, astrology, yoga, intuitive healing, art therapy, and, listen to this, cult interventions. So I can definitely foresee a future episode around that topic. Prior to her study of human design, she worked in sales and marketing at CBS Publishing in New York and was president of MetaQuality Inc., an international consulting training company. She now resides in Austin, Texas, where she works as a real estate broker in addition to her offerings as a human design consultant. I'm a testament that Barbara's training in human design and astrology, along with her diverse life experiences and her innate gifts as a listener and a questioner, makes her uniquely able to communicate with her clients and empower them in a meaningful way. In fact, it was my session with Barbara that inspired me to think about doing a podcast series. So I am now supremely honored and excited and grateful that she has agreed to partner with me for an occasional chat where we discuss the themes and the patterns of the times we find ourselves in through the lenses of the human design system and the astrology modalities. Barbara, welcome and thank you for joining me today. And as we are recording our first conversation on February 14th, 2022, in addition to welcoming you, may I wish you a happy Valentine's Day.
And the same to you, Jared. It's a wonderful day to have this conversation.
Yes, I totally love the atmosphere of love that you can just feel in the field.
And to start out just with what human design, it's all about self-love or enlightened selfishness and understanding that any relationship starts with yourself. And so on Valentine's Day, it's to understand that acceptance and self-love is primary and the foundation of any other relationship that follows. And so for all of us, or all of you, or everyone is looking for a mate, that oftentimes what's overlooked is how you relate to yourself. And so that's why it's a wonderful day to launch this conversation, because we can talk about what's happening in the world and how we're all being affected by it and how it can change our direction moving forward, because this is really an awareness game, awareness of values, awareness of love, but also awareness that we're not in this game by ourselves, that we're really influenced by other forces outside of us. And if we don't understand what those forces are, we can be putty to being changed by those forces, where we begin to feel more alienated from ourselves. And as a result, self-alienation often leads to, frustration with other people.
I totally relate to everything you've just expressed. And I will say, I will confess that arriving at a space of self-love was one of the hardest challenges that I've ever faced. I didn't really even know that I wasn't loving myself. In human design, I have the open will center. I always thought I had something to prove, and I was really pushing really hard. but it was one of the greatest gifts when I finally started to turn within. And of course, the human design system was a huge part of that for me. So you have organized some thoughts to keep us in a flow of conversation today around some of the specific transits and gates that are activated right now in February 2020. And you've sent me some of the notes to review. This is an interesting, well, it's obviously an interesting time to be alive on so many levels, but so many people are talking about something big happening in February 2022. And so I'm curious to kind of ground that in conversation with what you've seen in the astrology chart and in the human design body graph. What's going on right now?
Well, it's interesting because being trained as both an astrologer and human design analyst, I look at things from both viewpoints. What I appreciate about human design, though, it goes a little bit deeper. And this is not a competition with astrology. It's simply that astrology is one of the integrative elements within the human design system. And the whole is always greater than the sum of the parts. So part of astrology is then filtered through the Kabbalah or the Tree of Life. It's also filtered through the I Ching. So what I would say is right now, most people are being influenced by a background frequency. Now you can say, what do you mean by a background frequency? You could say electromagnetic field of information that's triggered to activate in a precise way. So if we look at a software program or video game, we know that there's certain levels that you reach, and all of a sudden the background's different, and you've got to use different triggers and different kinds of ways of manipulating so you win the game. And so you could say that we all are in a field of information that comes to us in wave formations, and then we digitally interpret it holographically as sight or sound or taste or touch, whatever. And we can accept this now because we've got the 5G and we're working with you could say a simulated world, or as Zuckerberg would say, the metaverse. And so we are affected by these frequencies, which we can see in headlines in the newspaper, or we can see them being fulfilled in our relationships with other people or relationships with ourselves. So December 22nd of 2021 was what we call a big nodal change. Now, when we speak of a nodal change, what do we mean? Let's pretend that you're an actress or actor and you're going to perform on a stage. And you've been on the stage and there have been all these props, furniture, lighting, everything's one way. And you go there the next day and everything's totally different. You're saying, wait, how do I say my lines in a jungle setting, whereas before it was in an urban setting? You know, it's like, holy cow, what am I going to do here? So the nodes, they refer to imaginary points where the moon's orbit intersects the ecliptic of the sun. Now, the ecliptic, it again is an imaginary orbit, you could say. As we look up at the sun, it appears that the sun's rotating around the earth. So the apparent path of the sun rotating around the earth, intersected by the moon's orbit, creates what we call the north and south node. In Vedic astrology, we call it the dragon's head or the dragon's tail. So it creates a background frequency or stage in which we're introduced to very different forces in very different situations, but they're all part of a programming device that sort of brings a pattern of development to the world, as well as individuals who populate that world. So on December 22nd, 2021, Jared, we moved from a nodal axis of Gemini and Sagittarius, which you could say higher wisdom versus practical application of that wisdom, far distance travel, short distance travel. Those are some of the astrological terms, very generalized, to the Taurus-Scorpio axis. This is very different. Taurus-Scorpio is fixed, and Sagittarius-Gemini, the energy is mutable. It comes, it goes back. Now we're in a fixed nodal environment, which will remain until July of 2023. So it goes for about 18 months. So this is why things are beginning to change. And it's very interesting, at the beginning of the year, the last of the, let's say, the nodal environment was dealing with power, dealing with the bully, dealing with the idea in human design that power is only great when it's display, and this use of power is for the common good. Now, the bully means, the energy to initiate, but it also does not preclude being a bully, whether this is, whatever stage you're putting this on. But we moved into what we call in human design, they're what we call 64 hexagrams, which relate to the Ray of I Ching. So when we look at the nodal environment, we're not just thinking of nodes in someone's 12 houses of the zodiac. We're looking at what circuit are the nodes in. There are 3 circuit groups, and each circuit group has 2 groups within the circuit group. And then we're saying what planets are activating this. So what happens is when the nodes activate a certain channel, it really brings into light the stage. And the stage now is all about, drum roll, power. It's all about power. We move from, the power of the great to power in great measure. So that is about the accumulation of power, but it's about the retention of power as well. And we know that there's a transitory nature to power and influence. You can be on the top of the field one day, and the next day you're down in the gutter. And so once you gain power, how do you keep it? Well, it's interesting. This is about power in great measure, and it is all about the energy to manage. It's the management of energy. So in other words, power is how do you manage the energy? So Jared, you've been out there in the world. How have you seen this power issue surface in the news?
Well, I'm not paying too terrible much attention to the news. So I don't know if I'm the best person to answer that question. But what I can say is that obviously there are those in positions of power who are sort of acquiescing or cooperating with sort of a fear-based intention to cling on to the status quo, to keep the machine moving, to maintain all of the current systems, and to keep everyone kind of focused on or maybe distracted by the issues with the coronavirus. And so you can kind of, I don't know if that's an introduction to something you could respond to in terms of what you're seeing.
That was perfect. That was perfect, because you can see that it's the power of focus. In other words, we live in an environment where how we perceive determines our actions. And so leadership, or let's say power in great measure, is how do we manage the energy of power? And it's interesting because this is in the channel of or in the circuit group of the individual circuit. So this is about individual empowerment through securing and maintaining power through what? It's the line 4, which is security, focusing on basing a strong foundation. So in the external world, we can say, okay, let's look at the Canadian truckers. So they have a certain power base where they're saying, you're not the power, you work for the people. You don't tell us what to do. We've had these mandates, and now we're the ones who deliver the goods. We're the people that make things happen. So we can see that we're looking at in sort of a battle, you could say, because human design is also working with the binary, conscious, unconscious, and we can see that unconscious forces are now moving into action with the truckers, and there is a standstill between the management of power through totalitarianism, through mandates, through violating constitutional authority, and then the individuals saying we have weak leaders. We are organizing and we are becoming self-empowered by establishing a strong foundation by saying enough. So we're seeing now from either perspective, each party is going to be perceived as I'm correct. Oh no, we've got this, we've got to do this, and we are not going to compromise. And so it's very difficult for a conversation to be had, because this is a fourth line, which is all about establishing a strong foundation. Now, what's fascinating about this power struggle is we can also see it with Joe Rogan. So Joe Rogan is someone who has many, many, many millions of people following him, but he is self-empowered through his own voice and through his associations, historically through his life. He is not controlled by corporate media, but corporate media now, whether it is through Spotify, and it's interesting, just curious, when we talk about power, money talks. And so did you know the major stockholder of Spotify is a major stockholder of Moderna vaccines? And the reason that Rogan was being, let's say, censored by someone who had just sold 50% of his songs to Blackstone, that was Neil Young. You better believe that there's some background music going on where the power to control the news is being utilized. Again, fourth line security. How do we develop a strong foundation where we can continue to control the news? That's the war on one hand. And Joe Rogan, on the other hand, saying, no, I appeal to those people who don't fit into your formula, to your algorithm. So the nodal signature now is, how do you manage the energy to have power? And then it goes to the 8th hexagram, which is meaning basic worth realized. In other words, you can feel good about yourself when you can manage power correctly and bring something that contributes to society as a whole. So those are the nodal from Scorpio to Taurus. But also from an astrological point of view, Scorpio is, as a general principle, it deals with topics nobody wants to discuss. So we're in an environment where no one wants to discuss what Joe Rogan had Dr. Malone or, Peter McCullough or some of these people on his podcast. We don't want to discuss that. But see, the Scorpio is all about what you can't avoid. So these conversations are going to be more. And everyone at some point in your life, you're going to hit things that you won't discuss when you're 20, but you'll have to discuss it when you're 40 because there's a maturation process. And Scorpio, or Pluto, which rules Scorpio, is a trigger. It's an energy. It's inexorable. It moves very slowly, and it's bringing up topics about power that no one has wanted to discuss before. Is this soul rape that the world is going through? Is it enslavement that the world is going through? It is shame that the world is going through. Are our leaders betraying us? This is all power stuff. And we're now seeing things that are establishing cognitive dissonance, that's establishing financial wars. And now we've got a platform, fourth line, it means networks, talking with other people, finding your own truth, getting out of the truth. So that is the nodal environment that we're in. It's okay, we're going to learn about how we're going to manage power. And if the power that's managing us, if that doesn't work, how do we contribute? How do we find security within this dynamic, which seems to be ubiquitous? How do we find respect for other people's gifts? How do we communicate with other people that disagree with us? Are we going to attack them and make them wrong? Are we going to ask clarifying questions? Because everybody's right, because we're all wired to see things differently. And when I say they're right, everybody's going to have an opportunity to express their opinion. And when you can speak, you can share your opinion with others and learn, is it really based on fact or emotion or my past wounds or whatever? So what's really important now is because gate 8, is a throat gate. It means that it's going to be expressed through a way to inspire other people by the way that you act or the way that you use your power. So this is kind of the nodal background that we're going to see all the way until July 23rd. It's going to be quite dramatic.
Yes. Fascinating and beautiful. And so obviously, and at the risk of making this sound like too much of a commercial for the human design system, I think we can say that one of the things that it can do for an individual and then subsequently, therefore, for a collective is to give us a language through which we may come into our own sovereignty and authority as an individual. And then it kind of creates like a sandbox where we can have collective conversations in that way that you're describing. Because through this sort of nitty-gritty individuation process, you realize what you're bringing to the whole, to the collective. And so that's brilliant. And so if you're listening to this or watching this and you haven't done your human design body graph chart, your natal chart, you've got to take a look.
To that point, Jared, thank you for putting that in, because there's some people that are designed to be true leaders. There's some people designed to be revolutionaries. There's some people designed to be the space keepers, the meditators, the people who pray. And I was watching a live feed from Windsor, Canada, and the protesters, quote, the protesters, there's a large group of people praying. And that was their empowerment. How are they going to contribute to this questionable use of power? They were praying. So everybody has a unique way to contribute. And the next 18 months are about how are you going to contribute and fulfill this need to be you in your contribution when we're dealing with what's the right use of power. And, is the power to crush the human spirit and shrink their capacity through a global mindset, or is it to empower the individual? And human design has said that in 2027, leading up to 2027, we're on a cusp of a great change, and there's no one you can trust. In this revelation given to Ra-Uru-Hu, it was stated very clearly, there's no one you can trust. You do not trust the government. You do not trust your friends. You trust your inner authority. And that will help you navigate through the incredible structural changes. Now, the structural changes people have seen happening, but we have, coincidentally with this background of power, we have 3 planets that are transpersonal, that no one can control, and those are Pluto, Uranus, and Neptune. So they're flavoring this whole stage. We're on the stage of power, and how do we contribute? What do I do here? What do I do? I don't know how to contribute to what's happening in the world. And first of all, it's not really understood, I feel, until you understand your design. Because sure, all of us have been conditioned from birth to be what we're not. There are forces out there that want to use our energy to their advantage. And so when your energy is used, it's where you feel like you're not self. So we use the term in human design, it's the not self. So there's specific ways of moving out of this perceptual entrapment through conditioning throughout the years where you think you need to be someone. You've got to have cleavage if you're a woman. You've got to have a fat wallet if you're a man. You've got to have a certain house, certain structure. But also what's very important, there's another conditioning that's happening with the Great Reset, that you should live small, tiny house, just rent. This is all disempowerment at one level. It's all what we call not self propaganda. And the way that you see through it is empowering yourself through self-love, knowing how to make decisions so you can watch what's happening without being thrown into the gutter and why it's happening.
Thank you. Yes.
So the one, let's talk about Pluto, because Pluto is the great transformer. It's a sleeping phoenix rising from the ashes, but it's also, because you can't avoid it, you have to be aware of it. It brings great changes. When people have strong Pluto aspects in their chart, you're going to say, what's happening. Now remember, we're electromagnetic energy and Pluto is a trigger. All of a sudden, let's say you wake up in the morning and your left leg isn't working right. Get out of the bed, left leg's not working. You don't know what happened. This is Pluto. It's challenging the foundation in which you move in your life. So Pluto now is in Capricorn. In astrology, it's in late degree of Capricorn, between 25 and 26 degrees Capricorn. But in the human design chart, it is in the 60th hexagram, which is the very last hexagram of the 360, of the 64 hexagrams. But it is in the hexagram of limitation. So now we're dealing with material limitation, supply chain lines, inflation, your dollar buys less than what it did before, limitation, 6 feet apart. You might spread an imaginary disease or a real disease, depending on your perspective. Wear a mask, Got to reduce the oxytocin from the smiles you receive from other people. Limitation in the environment. So what does Pluto say about the limitation? It says the acceptance of limitation is the first step to transcend it. So now all of us are saying, okay, we're limited. How do we transcend it? Now we've got the nodes in. It's about power. How are we going to use our power to transcend limitation? I want to go back to the Canadian truckers. Here, the premier mentions, you're shutting our economy down. This is not okay. You're blocking things from working. And he gives this whole litany of what they're done. And for a minute, I thought, well, you're talking about the Canadian government? You arbitrarily chose what industries and businesses were essential and non-essential. You prevent a lot of truckers from working during that time. So it's very interesting to see the inversion that can take place. But again, Pluto is dealing with how do you deal with limitation? It's in the second line. It's being called for everybody to be decisive. And it basically means you accept limitation. You're not going to emotionally kick your heels, cry and complain and be a malcontent and victim. What you do is you say, where's the opportunity where I can transcend the limitation and experience something new? Now, we have in everybody's imprint, we all carry this particular frequency. It's activated at different times. And anyone born in the sign of Capricorn has gone through a very difficult period when Pluto's been going through Capricorn. But anyone born in the latter degrees, the last, from January 16th to the 20th, 21st, this is affecting the way they see things. But for other people, it's saying, we're going to have limitation. The party's over. We do not have the same abundance. The government's 80% of all the dollars printed since we went off the gold standard have been in the last year. If anyone wants to read The Great Reset by Klaus Schwab, they're going to print the money to collapse currencies, to create dependency. So we're seeing the limitation, also censorship, limitation of informed consent. It's a limitation of you being informed on how you make a decision. So this is Pluto. It is fascinating because Pluto, Uranus, and Neptune, in the human design system, including the nodes, they are all in the individual circuit group. So 2027, we're working up to 2027. It's really the empowerment of the individual and not the collective. So more and more people are joining forces based on their own inner truth and saying, what's the right use of power and how can I contribute? That's a stage. But Pluto is saying, okay, guys, party's over. Limitations setting in. You're noticing that, all of a sudden your healthcare is going up. Your insurance is going up. The gas is going up. This is all limitation. So wake up, everybody. This is Pluto. It's got 4 more gates to go through. This is a long-term process. But coupled with that, if that isn't enough, we have the planet Uranus, which is the game changer. It's the great awakener. It is an energy that throws all the lights on. It is revolutionary. Pluto is evolutionary. So Uranus is coming into Taurus. So anyone who is a Taurus or Scorpio, you're going to be affected by this. So, and Leo and Aquarius, because they're fixed signs that will feel this movement of what the heck is happening. So this is imprinting. Yeah.
Let's get into that just with a little bit more depth. Well, actually, a couple of things. One is when you referenced that individual circuit in the human design body graph, we're talking about really the linear circuits that run straight up and down the middle of the body graph, starting with the 2343. Okay, and I'm looking at your body graph right now because a lot of what's happening in these transits activate things for you.
Oh, yeah.
And so what I'm wanting to ask us to do right now is to take a bit of a detour and sort of ground, like, for instance, in your experience, ground what the current transits and planetary placements are doing in your design. And then similarly, like, for instance, my sun sign is Taurus. So Uranus moving into Taurus, how does that affect someone like me? And then another layer to that is I am an Aquarius ascendant, which is ruled by Uranus. So that adds another dimension to it. I'm just, because we've talked about kind of how these transits are manifesting in the collective field in the environment, but like if we can really ground it in our experiences or in the experiences that these things are impacting, I think there would be value to that.
Mm-hmm. So how everybody's unique. There's 768 incarnation crosses, and there are thousands of variations within the incarnation crosses. And so when I'm speaking of channels or gates or activations, there's 64 gates. There are 36 channels. And of these 36 channels, 32 belong into a circuit group. So when we look at Pluto and we look at Uranus and we look at the nodes, they are in the individual circuit group. So this means empowerment. This is empowerment or disempowerment. You can be disempowered by these energies or empowered. It also brings a mutative force. So anyone who is in the fixed signs is going to have a very powerful mutative energy in the next 18 months. Now, if you could be any sign and have your moon, let's say in Taurus, and that could be affected as well. And I think the key here, Jared, let's say for you, how it's affecting you, for those of people that are listening that know human design, Jared has an activation. And we say activation, you could say unconscious in his environment. His stage is going to be, what are the fundamental truths? I need to know the big picture. I need to know the fundamental truths. But it's just kind of a soft breeze that blows through him. It's like, oh, this is interesting. This is interesting. Now with Uranus coming in, it has fired that up.
Yes.
There's been a sudden, oh my God. And it's hard to be around other people because your mind now is really activated to say, okay, what do I know to be true and what is false? So this is going to put you in a pressure to be able to articulate it, but also a pressure to be changed by it, mutated by it. So it gives you greater light into the mystery of what is true for me. I'm really going to put it front and center in my life instead of that little romantic breeze blowing by me. Now it's becoming a front seat movie that you want to understand. I mean, that's what I'm interpreting it. How would you describe it?
I can resonate with everything you've expressed, for sure. And you were referring to, I have the 61 in the, that's what, the inner truth gate, which is on that sort of central spine. Mm-hmm. No, I totally resonate with everything you're saying. And because of my knowledge of human design, what I've learned so far, and then a little bit of my astrology background, I can give verbal or even mental form to this. It feels to me it's less like opinion or idea or belief, and it's more like knowing and experience. It's like as I'm experiencing these things, because I've received the language through human design and gene keys and astrology, it's like, oh yeah, there it is. I see. Yeah, that's what's happening, which makes it a lot easier to experience, because otherwise, and I've been in situations like this in the past, this mutation is happening. And because we are all conditioned to be homogenized and behave the same way culturally, when you have an experience that's outside the realm of that conditioning or a social expectation, without something like human design or astrology or gene keys, you don't know what to do with it. So I think it's brilliant that we're kind of bringing that to light right here again. I feel like I'm a commercial, but this is really delicious.
So Jared, in what you said was very important. You said you knowing it rather than believing it. So when another part of the individual circuitry is the knowing circuit. That's one of the circuit groups within the individual circuitry, and it's because you know it. It's a different frequency within you.
Right. And it involves less the sort of mental conceptualization. And it's more like I've heard people say in this human design environment, they don't know how they know, they just know. And it's almost a sort of visceral, somatic, embodied, like, there it is. And I'm learning to trust it, as opposed to when I was younger and conditioned and homogenized. It's like when you get those hits, you can kind of ignore them a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, and what's interesting too, if we look at the Pluto, let's say in your chart, it doesn't. For me, you have gate 60. For me, I don't have any of that particular channel. You have gate 60, line 1, which is the acceptance of limitation. Is the first step to transcend it. So you have it. But now you're being imprinted with line 2. So you're being called, the 60th gate, line 2, is very different, because instead of the foundations, now you're being called out. And, it changes. You should feel a slight difference in that frequency. Do you feel it?
Yes.
With limitation?
Yes. Let me see if I can articulate.
Because it's an overlay. In other words, the decisiveness. See, in the knowing circuit, an individual can be decisive or indecisive, either way.
Right.
But there's a decisiveness now in this particular imprint that would, you've accepted limitations, but there's a decisiveness to act when an opportunity comes that you can transcend the limitation.
Yes. So with this, the energy of this 60th hexagram, in my experience, it's almost as though the opportunity, and I may be kind of reiterating the concept that you've expressed in a slightly different way. It's almost like the opportunity to transcend is sort of a golden nugget hidden within the limitation itself. So that's kind of been my relationship with that energy as I became aware of it in my body graph, and then I think back on experiences that I've had. And sometimes I have acquiesced or surrendered to the limitation if I'm low on my emotional wave and don't have the fortitude. I mean, even if I see, as you said, an opportunity, depending on where I've been, there have been times when I haven't taken advantage of it. What I'm feeling recently, which is sort of in support of what you expressed, and maybe a reiteration of it, is that all of a sudden my journey has brought me to a place where I feel an innate potential to, as you said, I feel called out. So it's almost like I feel an embodied potential to assist others in realizing their capacity to transcend limitation.
Beautiful. So the second line, there's an action implied that's different than investigating. Now you're going to be called out. And
Right.
you're doing the podcast, right?
Sorry?
You're doing the podcasts.
I'm doing the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. This is the platform through which, or a part of the platform through which I'm answering the call. It's a call and response.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. And see, you also, I think we can bring this up here. You are different than I am because you have the emotional wave, which is a frequency within you that allows you to gain clarity over time through allowing the nuances or feeling of something to reveal themselves to you. So how would you describe, because I can be very quick because I'm not on the wave, so to speak, and yours is more, it's colorful. I'm going to put colorful.
Yes, it has its ups and downs.
Mm-hmm.
So this is really interesting to think about within the context of mutative experiences, because when you're feeling the change in an environment or a field, like what you're discussing initially with the nodal shift, like first it's an acknowledgement of that feeling of a shift or a mutation or a change, and then there's an emotional response to it. And then what I've learned through human design is to allow the cycle of the emotional response to have its ups and downs and stabilize before any action or response. To not react impulsively, like if that mutation results in a feeling of excitement or a high, one day, the next day, you may have taken a dive. So I think I have come into a good, comfortable place of honoring that. And part of what, and some of what you're sharing is new to me, and some of what I'm expressing verbally is new. So I'm hearing myself express this for the first time. But I did feel a shift in December that's in parallel with this nodal change. And the intervening time has been sort of an acclimating to that. And I know you're about to talk also about the 22, which is activated by Neptune, but it's also a big deal in my chart. So I'm really excited to add that dynamic to this too.
Gate 22 is Pisces. So people who know astrology, in human design, gate 22 is Pisces, and it deals with grace. It's a quality of behavior which is best suited in handling situations in life. You could say the mundane, not that there's a necessarily difference from the mundane from the mystical, but it's what we call social openness. And if we call it grace, that's a signature. And I think the key here is to understand that it's connected to emotions, and it's connected to hearing, sound, listening to people. You could have perfect pitch, but it goes a little bit deeper. It has to deal with the desire to connect to the divine, to the poetry, to the music, to the muse at a very deep level. It's almost unrequited love. Unless you're really expressing your song, unless you're really writing, unless you're really listening to someone, you can move to these incredible elevations of, oh my God, this is wonderful, to what the heck happened? I'm in such a lousy mood, and I feel like I'm never going to come out of it, right?
Yes. Yes,
and
to all.
So when you have the whole channel, that's what will happen. And if you just have the gate 22, that means you're reaching for, that social experience that will give you that epiphany. Now, I want to Gate 22, again, it's individual. All these transpersonal planets now are empowering or disempowering the individual. So if we look at this as connecting to the muse or the spirit or the wonder of that connection, so musicians, poets, this is their line. It's also the individual wanting to mutate and express to the collective or group a different way of behaving. So if we look at, I'm going to go back up to Windsor in Canada, and I want to go back to the prayer group, because you see, it was interesting. The prayer group was connecting to the situation through connecting to a higher source as Gate 22. In the mundane world, how is grace going to come in? We're going to do it through prayer. Then you go to Ottawa, where the people were, dancing and singing and challenging the government. One person came up and said, I have to thank the Premier of Canada. Oh my God, he has spurred such a spirit within the people here. Because he said in Quebec, it's usually been the rest of Canada and Quebec, and now we're all one. He said the spirit is unbelievable. I feel like I'm transcending. So you can see that the beauty of 22 coming in with Gate 60, we're dealing with how do you transcend the limitation? Well, you transcend it as an individual, being decisive in how you use your power. And so you have 22 in, which is very interesting. You have it in the frequency that Neptune is now. It's Gate 22, line 6. So you're going to feel an amplification of this energy and a desire to, be on the podcast, talk with people, be more open, be more socially open. And it makes you feel, okay, I can be the role model here about how to go out as myself and feel the energy, feel the wave, and share my personal experience. That's how it's affecting you.
Beautiful. Yes. And I think it's fascinating to me to think about the cycles of life and the relationship between, like, I was born in 1982, and of course some of these transpersonal planets speak to generational cycles. But it's beautiful to me that I'm alive right now to be a part of this mutation, this shift that we're all experiencing. And it's fascinating to contemplate the specific energy that colors my design relative to the experience I'm currently having. I think part of my grace is I'm wanting to create an environment where everyone can feel this, I'm going to use the word empowerment, this relevance, this worthiness. And with regard, I can just ground this in a real example to kind of make myself seem more focused. But like the 1222, so the end of it in the throat is the Gate 12, which has to do with caution, and it kind of meters what's expressed. I guess, is that a fair way to say that? Because of a fear of rejection, or I guess rejection is a good word, but there's some kind of a fear that what you're expressing isn't going to be well received. But there's an energy for me in this 22 that I think is particularly relevant right now, which is the grace to understand that we are all human and that we all have stuff going on and that we all have a voice and that we all have the right to be and we all have the right to share our voice. And Joe Rogan has the right to not work with Spotify anymore. His message will still get out there. Ultimately, a test of power would be, does that $1 million contract really mean that much to him that he would have his voice suppressed? Maybe we'll see the answer to that. But I think my life experience has brought me to the place where I'm willing to say, advertise my secret. Actually, that's a song lyric that I recently heard that helped me articulate this idea. I'm willing to advertise my secrets. I have the I'm willing to confess. I think the 12 line 3 is like the line of confessing. I'm willing to do that so that it liberates other people to do that too.
And that's part of the empowerment, because it is to empower, because the quality of your emotional expression, whether it's sharing your experiences or whatever, advertising your gifts, whatever, the quality of that emotional expression actually conditions other people to accept change in their life. In other words, they can be empowered through you as the role model. So this frequency, this channel, the social being, is something that is being activated now with Neptune. So what it means, though, too, on another scale, we've got Pluto dealing with limitation. Uranus is the great awakener, to have people find out what's true now, because last 2 years, Pluto was in 61 dealing with personal truth. But Neptune makes it's hard to see. So even though this is all going on, there's a sleight of hand happening. We're saying, only get, what's this thing of misinformation? Now, we've seen that the main news has given us a lot of misinformation, but it's okay for them. But someone else who goes against their standard, then it's labeled as misinformation. They have to censor it. So this is Neptune. Neptune comes in and it says it's not real clear for how the individual is going to navigate through this time. But we know that through your decision-making authority, it's basically, the whole thing is dealing with who's the authority here. Is the authority outside of you in the form of a government going to make decisions for you? Or are you going to be self-empowered through your own authority? And you don't know what it's going to look like when you become self-empowered. It could be like, oh my God, this movie is not what I expected.
Absolutely. Yes, but there's a bit of a paradox here, which I think that Neptune's about paradox. I mean, ultimately, those of us who claim an external authority have to admit that you've used your authority to give away your authority. And acknowledging that is huge, because you still may make the same choice. Like, oh, well, yeah, I'm going to acquiesce to what CNN or Fox News is telling me, or I'm not going to pay any attention to it at all, and that's my authority, and that's the choice I'm making. And so it's like there are two levels of this in the hierarchy of the paradox. It's acknowledge. Maybe ultimately, what I'll say is just acknowledge the choices you're making with regards to where you're assigning the authority. That's step one.
Mm-hmm. Very, very true. I love the idea of a paradox, the way that you use that. I remember when the word paradigm came in the 80s, and they had this video talking about a different paradigm, and it was a guy in a sports car, driving, dressed to the hilt, a beautiful red sports car, and he was speeding up a mountain, and he was ready to go around a curb. And there was this kind of hiker on the side looking at him and yelled out to him and said, "Pig." And the guy threw him the finger because he thought he was calling him a pig because of all of this. So he went around the curb and hit a pig, totaled his car. Okay, so this is the paradox: two simultaneous truths which oppose each other, and you have to find a higher truth to transcend the paradox. And
beautiful.
This is human design. Everybody's chart is paradoxical. It's like, how do I do this? You have to sit back, allow your decision making, gather information, use your mind as an incredible resource, but ultimately the decision is made unique to you, and then it will transcend the limitation, gate 60, acceptance of limitation. We're human, we have a body, we're all gonna go to the happy hunting ground at some time. So the limitation is, the paradox is our soul is eternal and the body is not. So how do you manage that one?
this is a beautiful segue into, I'm going to invite us to transition into a little bit more of a mystical layer of the conversation. So there's an aspect, you've just expressed that there's an aspect of us that's eternal, and we're talking about the soul or the higher self or the source self. In these times, it seems to me that there may be value in each of us understanding from that perspective that the energy that is now animating this incarnation on individual and collective level is the same energy that was party to the creation of these conditions to begin with. So let's say we're complaining about a government, but it is conceivable to think that your soul or your source self or your higher self, whatever language we want to use, was incarnated during the time when a government was created or a financial institution or, so it seems to me that a lot of times we need to, we talk about authority and external authority, but we also tend to like to find something outside of us on which to assign blame for things. And there's a layer of that that's like giving power and authority away. And it also suggests separation. Whereas through modalities like astrology and the human design system, after you become aware of your energy and there's sort of this individuation process, on the other side of that, I think it's only natural that we begin again to start to see ourselves as part of a larger whole, an organism that's bigger than just an individual. And I think that would be incredibly empowering, and it would shift the tone of a lot of the conversations we're having with regards to this big change and this mutation, because not only am I a part of this incarnation where these things are happening, but I can take responsibility for the previous generations and the previous cycles and the previous incarnations that led us to this current place. I have the courage to do that. And I would like to invite everyone else to think about all of these times in that way as well. Do you follow kind of what I'm suggesting? Mm-hmm. Like, it's easy to say, well, I didn't create this situation. But if you understand the eternal nature of your soul or your source or whatever language you like to use, if you understand the nature of that idea, then you'll understand that, well, in fact, you were party to the creation of all of these systems that are now in a state of mutation. And it's almost as though we as a collective species, as one body, are calling this big change to us. It's the next thing we're learning through. And I think that's beautiful.
And how has that changed your life, Jared, understanding that?
Oh, I'm going to say it's made me a lot more relaxed. As your awareness or your consciousness expands or ascends, we can get quite mystical with what those words mean, but it's made me I'm more awestruck. I wonder about more. I feel less self-important. And some people may find that statement to be a paradox because, there's a certain level of self-awareness or self-confidence or arrogance that a lot of people would project upon me because they're encountering me using my voice and starting a podcast or YouTube series. And they may say, well, who is he to express that? Well, I don't disagree. But what I'm going to say is there's nothing more important about me than about anyone, and I'm inviting you to share in whatever level of self-importance I have. But by looking at by understanding, by allowing this paradigm shift, by embracing this mutation, that through my experience, it's made me chill out, because it's all just part of a cosmic dance, a stage play. As you know, if we use the analogy of the stage set with the nodal shift, it's like, oh, okay, so I don't have to be quite so emotional or energetically charged. I don't have to be so heavy-handed in my assigning of meaning to things. I can kind of be an uplifting, positively focused, curious, awestruck, humble participant in this unfolding.
That's the awakening of the individual, understanding that they're in, a greater picture. That's why when I was little, I used to love these little workbooks where you could connect the dots. You didn't know what the picture was. You saw all these dots, and there was this wonderful expectation of the feeling you would receive once you got the picture. What's the promise of the picture? And the more dots you would connect, the feeling would get stronger until yes. And that's what I felt when you were sharing there, in terms of going from the micro, to the macro, and how putting that level of peace, or satisfaction in your life, of being chill.
Yeah. I love the idea of the eager anticipation of the connect the dots. And it reminded me of another song lyric that I'll share. A British musician or a group named London Grammar. And she has a song, she expresses, but I swear the skies are fine. Like, I swear. Oh, not the skies, the stars. I swear the stars are fine. Yeah, it's like, at that level, like we get all caught up in kind of the, like you said, micro minutia level of our experience, but at the cosmic scale, this is a moment of powerful mutation. We've had them before. We'll have them again. Embrace it. Enjoy it. Allow it. Accept it. Celebrate it. Play with it. Have fun with it. So many of us have forgotten that life is supposed to be fun.
Yeah, and I think that's where it's important to understand the empowerment. Capricorn does have a sense of humor to it. And I think that there's a beauty when you can have fun with all of this. As you said, when you're chill, you're relaxed, you're watching it, you're not depressed by it, because in the knowing circuit, with the individual circuitry, with mutation, there's always the potential of depression, always the potential. And so much of this is knowing it'll pass. Just be present with it. Just let it move. Be chill. Look up at the stars. Things will work out. Once you know your role. Because you could be the one with the gauntlet that's leading the charge, or you could be one in the prayer group by the border, wishing for a different outcome.
Beautiful. And then there's another layer to this, which is the acceptance of the antagonists in the story, because they have a role to play, and they're provoking the mutation at some level. But in terms of the individuals who play the roles of the antagonists, and I'm using the word antagonist to just stay with the analogy of the play, they don't think they're antagonists. It depends upon the story. Some of them are behaving as not self, or operating in shadow, and that's one advantage to the Gene Keys language with each of these 64 energies, because you can understand that there's a powerful positive potential to each of them, but then there's also the potential that they can be used for not good, doing quotation marks. But if there's an antagonist that doesn't know their design, and they're homogenized and they're operating as not self, that can result in behavior that can provoke mutation in those of us who are individually awakening. So if they hadn't done that, we may not have the opportunity to awaken. It's like we learn to begin to say yes to all of our experiences.
And to recognize what is the playing field here. Because we have part of the antagonists are not playing fair. So biblically, they say, do not confront evil. You have to outflank it. And there is a binary. There is good. There is evil. Of course, you can transcend the forces, but it's not a conceptual. You have to master the frequencies. So a lot of people in the New Age, they have great verbal skills, but their life is a mess. And I'm not saying a mess because of transformation and mutation. I'm saying it's a mess because they're not walking their talk. And so as a result, it's something to be very aware of. What playing field are you playing on? And is the adversary playing fair or not? And that always has to be considered.
Right. And there's I totally resonate with what you're saying, and it has never made sense to me to have conversations or play with the evil. And we're using the word evil, that's a strong word, but the action of fear is to create more fear. That's a great Paul Selig quote. I don't know if you're aware of him. But that way of expressing it was huge for me to realize, and I'm saying that so that I can then follow up by saying, when you give your conscious attention to the antagonist, you have to be very careful with the quality of the energy and the attention that you're giving. Because if you're focusing on the antagonists in a way that is either fearful or angry or hateful or all of those lower frequency words that we know about, those energies on the lower end of the scale, you're actually not only bringing a harsh energy into your own field, but you're actually fueling through your focus that antagonist that you're giving your attention to. And so this is where I've expressed that if I can't be positively focused in my attention on something, CNN, Fox News, Joe Rogan, whatever it is, I'm going to just not give my attention to it. Now, at the end of the day, although we can disagree with people's choices and their behavior, I know we can all acknowledge that they have the right to be, and that there's a part of them that is connected to the source of creation, just like the part of us is connected to the source of creation. And that's a baseline that we can all remember. Like, you don't have to love the acts, but you can love the person.
And that's a good place to end.
I agree. It's brilliant. This conversation has been delicious and more exciting than I ever could have possibly imagined, and it's a brilliant beginning to what I hope will be a wonderful adventure of periodic conversations.
Thank you, Jared. I really enjoyed it.
You as well. I'm going to go have some chocolate and enjoy myself for the rest of the day. Okay, great. See you next time.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks again for joining us for this very special episode of the LightCast. I wanted to mention that if you haven't had a human design reading, Barbara is excellent. You may take a look at her website. It's humandesignconsultations.com. That's humandesignconsultations with an S.com. And you can take a look at the services tab and you'll see she has a foundation offering and then a number of advanced offerings, including an offering for relationship help. So check it out, take a look, and we'll look forward to seeing you for our next chat. See you next time.